When violence becomes a spectator sport. On the morning of September 10th, 2025, students filed into Evergreen High School in Jefferson County, Colorado. It was supposed to be just another fall school day. Instead, they became witnesses to horror. 16-year-old Desmond Hawley opened fire with a revolver, critically wounding two classmates before turning the weapon on himself. Investigations later revealed Hawley had been radicalized by the extremist online network. The shooting was a shock to Evergreen community, but the nation, it felt grimly familiar. A tragic event enters the headlines. Politicians rush to microphones. Hashtags proliferate. And underneath it all, public reaction fractures along ideological lines. Some mourned, others rationalized. A few even celebrated. The unsettling truth is that America is learning to treat violence as a spectator sport. Whether the victim is George Floyd, pinned under an officer's knee, or a conservative firebrand like Charlie Kirk, gunned down by an assassin's bullet, or a refugee like Irina Zarutska, stabbed on a Charlotte train, or students gunned down in their school's hallway. The same cycle repeats. Our compassion has become conditional, rationed according to politics, identity, or personal bias. Now, does this sound like a familiar pattern? But let's talk about George Floyd and how the birth of selective outrage started. George Floyd's death on May 25th, 2020 ignited a movement. Millions marched against police brutality, demanding systematic change. Yet even then, voices rose to say his life was not worthy of mourning. They pointed to his criminal record, as if mistakes in a man's past nullified the injustice of his final moments. This was not about justice. It was about convenience, which is an attempt to excuse indifference by reducing a complex human being to a caricature. Now, let's fast forward 5 years later. The same impulse surfaces when conservative commentator Charlie Kirk was unalived. On September 10th, the same day, while speaking at Utah University, Kirk was struck by a high-powered bullet fired from a rooftop. He collapsed at his Prove Me Wrong debate table before an audience of young conservatives and critics alike. For some, the reaction was horror. For others, it was an applause. Social media lit up with posts justifying the act, framing it as karmic justice for Kirk's political views. The same moral shortcut that diminished Floyd was now repurposed. Different politics, same dehumanization. Now let's talk about the one who did the unaliving of Charlie Kirk. New details make the Kirk case even more chilling. Just after a 33-hour manhunt, police arrested Tyler Robinson, 22, in southern Utah. He was turned in by his own father with the help of a minister close to law enforcement. The investigation uncovered damning evidence. He engraves a bullet. The shell casings left at the scene bore taunting messages. One read, "Hey fascists, catch another Bella Ciao, Bella Ciao." The refrain of an Italian anti-fascist anthem. Others included vulgar insults, as thoughts the bullet themselves were meant to serve as propaganda. Discord messages, online chats showed Robinson discussing the firearm, wrapping it in a towel, and abandoning it in the woods after the unaliving. The tone was matter of fact, even flippant, as though he was narrating a video game rather than the real act of violence. The firearm was a bolt-action Mauser 30-06. Was recovered near Utah Valley University. Hidden in the wooded area, surveillance footage catches Robinson fleeing the rooftop vantage point where he took that shot. Public figures responded swiftly. Utah Governor Spencer Cox called it a political unaliving. President Donald Trump demanded the unalive penalty. Even critics of Kirk politics condemned the act. And yet, in dark corners of the internet, Robinson's name was cheered. His mockings engraved were shared like memes. The assassination was not just an act of violence, it was content. Now let's talk about Charlotte, where a refugee was unalived. The same pattern appeared weeks earlier that a lot of individuals didn't really know about in Charlotte, North Carolina. On August 22nd, Irina Zarutska, a 23-year-old refugee from Ukraine, boarded the Lenox Blue Line light rail train. Having fled one war, she became the victim of another kind of violence, where she was fatally poked by a man with a long history of crime and untreated mental illness. The Charlotte residents brought flowers to the station. Officials promised new safety measures on public transit, but in online discourse, some voices dismissed her story as if she was reduced to a statistic. Her life framed an argument about immigration and crime rather than seen for what it was, a young woman who deserved safety and dignity. Now, back to the Evergreen High School that was the same day of Charlie Kirk's unaliving. Holly's shooting rampage left 2 students in critical condition and dozens traumatized. Investigations discovered he had been lured by extremist communities online and echoed the same radicalization pipelines that had fueled a lot of mass unalivings before. Here, too, public response fractured. Sympathy for the victims was widespread, but some attempted to excuse the violence by pointing Holly's vulnerability, his isolation, and his radicalization. Explanation is one thing. Justification is another. And once again, society blurred the line. There needs to be an erosion of moral clarity. Now that you have the background, I'm sure you're wondering what ties George Floyd, Charlie Kirk, and Irina Zarutska and the students of Evergreen together. It's not their identities, but it is the reaction to their sufferings. Floyd's past was used to deny his humanity. Kirk's politics were used to justify his unaliving. Zarutska's refugee status was ignored or politicized. Holly's radicalization became a reason for some to minimize his culpability. This is a conditional compassion, and it is corrosive. When violence becomes acceptable against people we dislike, when empathy is rationed out like currency, we do more than harm those individuals. We endanger ourselves. Today, it may be their side. Tomorrow, it may be ours. We need to condemn harm without exception. Condemning violence without exception does not mean ignoring accountability. Police reform was necessary after Floyd. Kirk's rhetoric will remain a point of national debate. Zarutska's unaliving exposed failing in public safety and mental health. The Evergreen shooting raises urgent questions about gun and extremism. But accountability is not vengeance. And celebrating harm, whether in the form of memes, engraving bullets, or online applause, erodes the moral ground on which justice must stand. We need to choose humanity. We live in an age of schadenfreude where social media rewards cruelty and partisan division tempt us to dehumanize. But history offers a warning. Societies that normalize political violence and selective outrage cannot sustain themselves. Charlie Kirk's unaliving scrawled mocking slogans on his bullets, transforming violence into performance. That alone should shake us. Violence is not a debate. Unaliving is not argument. Suffering is not a spectacle. George Floyd, Charlie Kirk, Irina Zarutska, and the students of Evergreen could not be more different. Yet together, they form a mirror, reflecting whether we as a nation would choose to humanity consistently or only when convenient. The answer will define us far more than our politics ever will.